This is an important lesson, not just for Gen Z members of the Hagel household. This pursuit of perfect decisions has been a challenge in my relationship with my wife Nina as well, particularly earlier in our relationship. She had a habit of not only seeking perfect outcomes for our family that didn't exist, but here's where it got really dicey. She would blame me for the inevitable negative consequences that came along with seemingly every single decision I made on behalf of the family. This is another one of those $20,000 topics from couples therapy, meaning we likely invested $20,000 in working through this particular relationship minefield. Money well spent. I'm happy to say we do much better in this regard now. How do we accomplish that, you ask? It's a good question, and one I didn't really take the time to analyze and appreciate until writing this episode of Dadages. I think the key for the entire family is this. We take more time to talk through important decisions for the family. And we don't focus on what is the right decision. Instead, we focus on what are the likely outcomes and the consequences of different decisions that are on the table, both positive and negative. And we select the best decision, not in spite of the negative consequences, but in full recognition and appreciation of those negative consequences and how they're outweighed by the positive consequences. This is part of the cultivation of the responsible, accountable mindset we discussed in our previous series on responsibility as a luxury and accountability as the price you pay for it. And don't let me fool you. Do you know who in my life is most often the one boxing me into the forced paradigm of the pursuit of perfection? Me. 100% me. I recognize and take accountability for that. So, we've now clearly explained that every decision we make and every action we take in life has both positive and negative consequences. Now, here's the really tricky part. No matter how wise or prescient we may be looking into the crystal ball of the future, we certainly can't anticipate all of the negative consequences associated with our actions. And to go even further, some of the negative consequences of our actions are not only unintended and unanticipated, they may also be completely imperceptible. There may be things that totally sneak up on us, knock the wind out of us, pull the rug out from under us, blindside us, pick your expression. These silent assassins are the things that can creep in and undermine us when we least expect it. In the next episode, I'll give you some pointers to help you look out for these factors, pay heed to them, and work your way through them. For now, let me give you a dramatic example from history to help you understand what I'm talking about. Do you remember our friend Gaudi? We introduced him in our episode, Don't Let What You Can't Do Prevent You from Doing What You Can. Antoni Gaudi was the great Spanish architect and designer who was responsible for the construction of La Sagrada Familia, the basilica in Barcelona that has continued in construction for 100 years following his death. We touted Gaudi as an example of how some of the greatest feats of mankind can be achieved even if they take more than a lifetime. But Gaudi paid dearly for the commitment he made to La Sagrada Familia. He was not a stable individual. He was a heavy drinker and drug abuser. I have to imagine these self-destructive behaviors were exacerbated by his obsession with the construction of the basilica. He was overwhelmed. While he was capable of the sacrifices he made for his work, he was not immune to the negative consequences that came with those sacrifices. In the end, they likely led to his death in 1926. He died alone in a hospital bed after being struck by a streetcar while wandering the streets in a drunken stupor. While the wonder and majesty of La Sagrada Familia and its ongoing construction stand as a testimony to his greatness, fittingly, he is also buried beneath the towering edifice. Gaudi was literally buried by the magnitude of his endeavors and the extent of his obsession. Let me now share the most poignant example from my life of operating within my capability, but getting way outside of my capacity. Spoiler alert, it also involves a building that nearly crushed me. This is a story about the most significant decision I ever made on behalf of myself and my entire family. It was the decision to move from Los Angeles to Dallas during COVID. We moved not one, but two households over 1,500 miles from California to Texas. It was a fundamental guideline for me that I would not create a situation that would separate the boys from their biological mom or from me when we moved. We'll talk in more detail about our move from LA to Dallas in future episodes. And the reality is that the move does not represent one decision, a series of hundreds of parallel processes and efforts all happening in a complex sequence to produce the outcomes that were realized over the span of a couple of years. It's a lot to digest, even in hindsight. For today's episode, I'll focus on just one piece of the puzzle, our home. We sold a home in Porter Ranch, California, which was in the San Fernando Valley north of Los Angeles. It is essentially as far northwest as you can go and still be in LA County. What's great about that is that even though it was during a time of great uncertainty around COVID, there was a major push at that time for families to get out of downtown urban environments and to get to more distant suburbs where there was less density and people could afford larger homes and more personal space. We benefited from this pressure in Los Angeles County, sustaining the value of the home we were selling. But this movement of families from urban to suburban areas in California was what I refer to as a micro-migration. By comparison, the waves of people moving from California to Texas was a true mass migration, like the wildebeests across the Serengeti of Africa. The mass migration, of which we were a part, fueled hysteria in the housing market in Texas, particularly in the area we had selected to live, the town of Fairview in northeast Dallas. It is a suburban, almost rural community with large homes on Texas-sized lots and a very strong independent school district. Houses in the area would only be on the market for days, sometimes hours, and certainly not weeks. We found a great house that had just come on the market and was move-in ready. We made a very compelling offer, went under contract in late January 2021, and proceeded to line up a mortgage to close on the home. Now, if you go back and look at weather reports from that time, you'll see that one of the sharpest cold snaps in recorded history in Dallas occurred that month. This was a deep freeze, and there was a fallout everywhere in Dallas, including in our home-to-be. The fire sprinkler system in the house froze and burst, flooding the entire first floor with hundreds of gallons of water. There was a river flowing from the master bedroom out the garage and down the driveway. It was a nightmare scenario because we had sold our house, the boys were already enrolled in school, and the wheels were literally set in motion for us to get to Texas. We loved the house and saw it as a potential forever home, so we hung in there as long as we could with the sellers. There was remediation and insurance claims and negotiations with multiple parties. Ultimately, after a protracted ordeal, we recognized that we could not see eye to eye with the sellers, and there was no way to keep the sale intact. We had to drop the purchase of our dream house. Meanwhile, we had to scramble and come up with somewhere else to live. There were no homes to rent in the school district, but we did find a reasonable house we could rent in a neighboring community. So we signed a lease, and my younger son Camden and I moved promptly. We had decided that he could not remain in California any longer because he was suffering academically far more than his brother Braden because of the unstructured nature of remote learning, which was not really conducive to his success. He was in the second semester of 8th grade, and many people smarter than me advised us that a second semester transfer in 8th grade from a California private middle school would be a softer landing place for him at a public school in Texas versus a transition into the first day of high school the following fall. Braden remained enrolled in Chaminade in Los Angeles, where he continued his remote studies, and Nina stayed back in California to coordinate the logistics of the move to Texas. As you can tell, each step of this process was based upon a set of decisions being made in response to the variables that were thrown at us, but the cumulative effects of those decisions continued to get more and more extreme and incredibly disruptive and unsettling, to say the least. Don't worry, we're just getting started. During the first couple of weeks, we were in the rental house, and right after Camden started school in Texas, another house came on the market. The house was in the best neighborhood in the school district. It was older, built in 1998. Don't worry, we'll come back to that. It had a ton of amenities like a pool, a sport court, and over 2 acres of land that backed up to a horse farm. It seemed pretty ideal. We made a decision and acted quickly. Actually, that's not true. I made a decision and I acted quickly. Nina was still holding down the fort in Los Angeles. We couldn't lose this house. While we had a rental in the area, it was not within the limits of the school district, which meant that while I had previously been under contract to purchase a home in the school district, which allowed Camden to start school, once the district learned that we did not purchase the home, both boys would be ineligible to enroll in school or to play varsity sports the following year, completely undermining the entire purpose of the move. So I pulled every penny of savings and borrowed some additional funds from my family in order to make an all-cash offer to buy the house on a 7-day close. Like I said, I was not going to lose this house under any circumstances. Looking back through the lens of hindsight, this seems insane. But I'm not saying I would have made a different decision if I had to do it all again. I was capable in that moment of doing things that others probably would not consider, and I was highly motivated. I still stand by the notion that it was the best decision at the time. But we got exactly what 2023 Chad would have advised 2021 Chad to expect: a complete mess. We were buying the home from a couple that was going through a bitter divorce. There was so much negativity around their family, it was almost as if that negative energy hung over the house like a black cloud. Because we closed on the house so quickly, we gave the wife 30 days to remain in the house while Camden and I continued to live in the rental, and we arranged for the big move to bring all of our stuff from California to Texas. Nina made the first trip to visit the house one weekend during the interim period. We made arrangements with the seller to get access. We drove over to the home, and we walked through the front door. I could read Nina's body language immediately. She was not happy. Feel the negative energy in the air. She is very sensitive to that sort of thing. We each caught fleeting glimpses of the seller and her children scurrying around the house while we were there. To this day, Nina is certain they were trolls occupying the house, and several stories from the neighbors about the public behavior of the family screaming at people in the neighborhood certainly supported the notion that they may have actually been a family of angry trolls. Even though the seller had signed a binding agreement that stated they would move out of the house at the end of the 30 days, it became very clear that she had no intention of complying with her obligations. On the day we were due to get possession of the home, the seller's occupancy ended at the stroke of midnight. I honestly had no clue if they would comply or not. I was at the rental house and I couldn't go to sleep that night, so I texted my buddy Steve Frost. You all know him, dad voice guy, and our first guest on Dadages. I said, "Hey Steve, are you up for going over to the house at midnight to see if they've left? You bring the flashlights and I'll bring the beer." Steve, being Steve, said, "Sure, I'm in." We pulled up to the house at the stroke of midnight, and thankfully we found it abandoned. We let ourselves in through the front door using the keys in the lockbox, and we popped some beers and toasted the new home. That was the last celebration of the house for quite some time.